Rick and Quita, thanks so much for joining us. You know, I grew up back in the 1900s, I like to say, and I can remember back then, following the civil rights movement, there was so much momentum, and people talked about affirmative action as a way to bring more people in, to provide more equity. Now we call it diversity, equity, inclusion. Mm-hmm. But it feels like we're talking about the same things some 50 years later.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, growing up as well in the 1900s, yeah. and what were, you know, sort of some of the still vestiges of legal segregation in South Carolina. I mean, I think we all agree we made some progress, but to some extent, everything's changed, but nothing has changed. And you look at a lot of the economic data, for example, the wealth gap is still wide. Black unemployment is still twice that of white unemployment. And on and on and on. And so, you know, but the reality is diversity, equity, and inclusion, as we talk about it today, it has its roots, obviously, back in civil rights. And I think our challenge is not how we look at this today, but how we sustain it for tomorrow, and how we build the kind of momentum where we see real sustainable change.
I think one of the things that intrigues me now is that people are making the business case for it. Before, it was really more the emotional case. Yeah. And it's not something that I ever would have thought the Chamber of Commerce would be talking about.
Yeah, well, we have no choice. And there's a business case. As I say all the time, it's not just a moral imperative, but there's a business case. One of our partner organizations, the WK Kellogg, published an exciting research report called The Business Case for Racial Equity. And here's what it says, that if we close the race opportunity gaps and inequities in America, our GDP grows by $8 trillion. That's astounding. And when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the data is very clear that companies that are more diverse are more innovative. They're more innovative, more profitable. So there is a business case to be made. Following the murder of George Floyd, we convened thousands of CEOs and business groups, not just around a conversation, but we launched what's called the Equality of Opportunity Initiative, which seeks to address policies, because there are some policies that we have to advance to help address these gaps in areas like education and employment and criminal justice, health and wealth, et cetera. But there are also some things that companies can be doing and are doing. And I was looking at some data from McKinsey following the murder of George Floyd, $350 billion committed to by the private sector. I mean, the challenge now is to actualize that and make it real. So the Chamber is helping to lead that effort in advancing this whole conversation around the business case for this work. It's the right thing to do, but it's good for our economy and it's good for companies and their profitability.
Speaking of companies, Quita, you know, certainly the last 3 years have definitely underscored the conversation about social determinants of health and health equity. Genentech has set a marker to achieve certain milestones by 2025. And you've just released your progress report. Where do things stand?
You know what, to the point that you both were making earlier, I believe that we have to make this more than a moment, right? This has to be a movement. This is our 1960s right now, and it is responsibilities of corporations to help us really move the needle and drive momentum. We did just launch yesterday our third Diversity and Inclusion Annual Report. It's on our website. And we've made 8 commitments towards ensuring that we are embracing the increasingly diverse world around us, whether that is from our employee population. We want to double Black and Hispanic directors and officers. In Genentech, we're based in South San Francisco. We have a very large Asian population, but that's not translating to leadership. And so we've made a goal around narrowing the gap. While we have more than 50% of our women are directors, we have not reached 50% with our officers, the very highest levels. We're close, but we still have to keep our foot on the gas. And incremental, and it's so important and instrumental to the business of Genentech. It is driving inclusive research, because we know that when we are bringing in all the patients who have disease and not just a certain segment of the population, that people can trust that the medications and the diagnostic tools that they need for their health are safe and effective in them. And we've made a number of commitments. We've got a study currently Katori, where we're looking at the indigenous population and specifically for them, how do they access specialty care? We just closed up a phase 4 study in multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis impacts people of color, yet they are very rarely studied. And so this study is very specific in Black and Hispanic patient populations. We have another study looking at diabetic macular edema with Black, Hispanic, and indigenous populations, because companies have to do the research. If COVID taught us nothing else, people want to understand, are the products safe and effective for the groups that are going to use them and not just one type of population?
It is one of those things that I think about as, you know, someone who has a genetic predisposition for late stage Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And generally it's women, and people of color are the most overrepresented in terms of being afflicted, and yet not
1% of the population of people in Alzheimer's clinical research. And here's the other challenge that we have. We're moving more to a precision medicine world, meaning that we're going to be looking at genetics and genomics to make decision treatments and to find different diseases. And yet, if we think about the oldest genome in the world, the African genome, less than 1% of the genetic material available to scientists is from Africa. 91% of the genomic material available to scientists is of European ancestry. And when I started with the co-worker, Advancing Inclusive Research in 2017, it was actually 88% of the genomic material available was of European ancestry. It's actually gotten worse, and it's now 2023.
What I wonder about is, how do you access some of these folks? Because I know, you know, I did a story about some folks being recruited by one of your competitors for an Alzheimer's trial. And part of it is building trust.
Yeah.
You know, certainly, even if you don't know about the Tuskegee experiment, certainly people have experienced a sense that the medical community often, if you're poor, if you're not of, you know, of means, doesn't necessarily treat you the same way.
Yes. You know, what's really important is, one, we can't blame the patients of color for not wanting to participate in the research, right? Because if we think about where are most of the hospitals, medical centers, they're not in the hood. And we talk about, you know, people of color.
Or in rural areas
in rural areas that, you know, they need to eat this, that, and the third. There ain't no Whole Foods, right, in some neighborhoods. And due to redlining, right, there's oftentimes not pharmacies, easy transportation to places. One of the things that we've done at Genentech is we've started this Advancing Inclusive Research Site Alliance. We've got to go to where the patients are. So we're in Birmingham, we're in LA, we're in Memphis, we're in Chicago, we're in the Bronx, and a number of other cities. And we're working with trusted centers who have established relationships with the community, who are going to stay in the community, because the one thing that we cannot do is go in and out, right? Because then people don't trust you. And so part of the opportunity is for companies to partner with community organizations, partner with the chamber, partner with others, advocacy organizations, to build trust in communities.
At the same time, we're at a point where companies that try to take more social stances are also finding pushback. How hard is it to navigate these days in the business community to try to say we're committed to these ideals, and yet have other people say, oh, you're too woke, or criticize that you're being too focused on those issues and not business itself?
Well, listen, I think the message is that, yes, we are awakened to the value proposition that this is good for our economy. And that's what we lead on. And I think when you see companies like Genentech and the work that Quita is leading, I mean, that's the kind of work that we have to stay focused on, where we can see real impact and change. And to steer away from the political football and rhetoric that's taking place. We're staying true to making the business case for this work. And I think that's the direction that we have to go with this. It's good for companies, it's good for our economy, it's good for local communities. You know, the reality is that people of color by 2050 will be the majority of the workforce. So it makes sense that we invest in initiatives now to close the skills gap. because we know that black students aren't competing at the same level in math and science. So let's solve for those problems.
Right?
And
Latinos are creating businesses at a faster rate than the overall economy.
That's exactly right. And speaking of business, black women, 17%. At a faster rate of black women business growth than any other sector in America. Let's support and invest in businesses today, because they will be providing and creating the jobs of the future. But we got to unleash capital. Less than 1% of venture capital goes to black and Hispanic founders. We got to solve for that. We got to make sure that black and minority-owned businesses get access to the 95% of consumers who live outside of our borders. So these are the kinds of initiatives and the kinds of efforts that we're advocating and the work that we're leading at the Chamber across the country. And again, it's good for our economy.
Where are we seeing success? Because we all know what the impediments are and what the challenges are. Are there some areas where we're really starting to see some traction?
Well, I tell you one that is just astonishing to me. I mean, during the pandemic, according to one report, 41% of black-owned businesses closed. The reality is, you look at data now, we've turned the curve, and the resiliency and the growth of black business and new startups is phenomenal. So that's been success. The challenge is, again, how do you get them the capital to grow and expand and create more jobs, and particularly the jobs of the future? And so there's some success, and you know, we have some challenges. When you look at the management positions and diversity on corporate boards, we have a long way to go there. So as we think about workforce and diversity, that extends from the top to the bottom to the top. And so we're trying to solve for those challenges as well.
I think about that with Latinos, it's similar data that a lot of folks had to close, but they bounced back. But it's that capital access that is so difficult. Absolutely. Even when you are a larger company with more than $1 million in revenue, a lot of people end up financing themselves, credit cards, family, because they don't necessarily have access to the banks. Given what we've seen with banks of late, do you think that's something that is going to get any better, especially where we are in our economic cycle right now?
Well, it has to. I mean, you think what we've been dealing with recently with Silicon Valley Bank, and you know, the impact of that, from what I've seen in talking to black founders who benefited from the resources of local banks like that, is devastating. And so we have to solve the capital issue. Again, I think there are policies in Washington that we're working closely with the Department of Treasury, CDFIs, for example, Community Development Finance Institutions, a great resource for black and other minority-owned firms. But we also have to work on the lending. Black founders and black businesses are less than half as likely to get financing from traditional vehicles than banks. And so there are a number of things that I think some companies are stepping up. You look at Goldman Sachs, its investment in women entrepreneurs. And so they're great examples that we're trying to replicate and build across the country. But it's capital, capital, capital that will help solve this challenge that we're facing, the wealth divide, the economic disparities that exist across our country.
I think the other thing that I think is important for organizations and corporations is to ensure that we're focused on paying equitable to our Hispanic, African American, Asian colleagues versus white employees, because we all know that the U.S. Labor Department says that Hispanic and black women make 60 cents on the dollar to what men make. And I can tell you at Genentech, and we've got it in our annual report, that we have no effective pay difference between people of color and white employees and women and white males.
How hard was it to get that kind of transparency? Because there's a lot of companies do not report it.
Well, and it's in the report, because you know, when you're happy about something, you're talking about it. One of the things that we did about 7 years ago was we made our salaries open, and then you understand, we have this thing called comp ratio, where you understand where you fit in the salary grid, so you could see, am I being paid too low, or am I at the high end? And I think that level of transparency over time allowed us to really ensure that our employee population was paid equitably.
That's a huge difference from what most companies do. And for employees, usually it's asynchronous, right? your employer has all of the data and you are just guessing where you might be.
And now you know. And I think more companies have to have that transparency. And we're seeing states like California now, when we have an open job position, we have to put the salary range, and that's very recent. So prospective employees understand what they should be paid as well.
You're also, as a company, investing in STEM education. You know, these days there's great debate about people investing in their education because they are often so laden down with debt. Is there more opportunity for people not necessarily have to go for a 4-year degree to be able to access companies like yours that have greater prospects for them building wealth?
Yes. We've got a number of initiatives through our Kindergarten to Careers program, where we're looking at how do we go into elementary, middle, and high school and teach science, because we know that science jobs are really some of the higher paid jobs, and oftentimes people of color don't get into STEM, don't have STEM opportunities. So in California, we have been we've been engaging with 1.2 million kindergarten to 12th grade students. We also have made a grant to San Francisco State University, where we're looking at the master's and PhD underrepresented students. And these are not like the students got the high GPA. These are like first generation, maybe average students, but something about them, we know that they can be scientists. What we have seen is that...
And how do you identify that?
The university identifies these students that are interested in it. And some of them don't have the high GPA, right? But they have a deep interest in science. And they may be working 2 or 3 jobs to go to do their undergraduate, and we're taking that burden off of them if they want to go on to get their master's and PhDs, so they don't have the burden of the debt, and they can stop working those jobs and concentrate on schools. And we're excited because 94% of these students have gone on to graduate and are in these PhD programs, and they're going to be the next generation of scientists. And when we think about the innovation that we're going to need for all of us, as Rick said, by 2050, the majority of the U.S. will be people of color. We're going to need scientists of color to help us solve the diseases that are going to impact us.
And I'll add, but it's an interesting dialogue around the value of a higher education degree as opposed to just getting the skills. I think it's both. When you look at industries like the construction industry, tremendous shortage of talent and workers. I think one area is that we don't talk enough about the vocational and technical colleges, but it really is about the skills. An untapped...
Listen, I talked to my financial advisor, and he says one of his wealthiest clients is a plumber.
Yes, I know. I just hired one, and they charge a lot of money.
Yeah, but seriously, I mean, that's an important business. It's always going to be in demand.
Absolutely. We say oftentimes there are millions of people without jobs and millions of jobs without people. One of the untapped talent pools that we're leaning in on those who were formerly incarcerated. Second chance hiring, $78 to $87 billion lost GDP because we don't create enough opportunities for those formerly incarcerated. So the bottom line is that I think we have to tap into every talent pool across our country and address these worker shortage. Whether you have a degree or whether you have the skill or certificate, it's about the jobs of the future.
You know, we started off talking about how we've been talking about this for a long time. As we close out, do you feel like this is a different moment? Do you feel like we are moving to a new level?
You know, every moment for some reason feels different. I'm optimistic. I think, again, as I said earlier, the challenge is not focus on moments, but movements, not focus on today, but tomorrow. And the way I view that is you got to make the economic case if it's going to be sustained. I mean, it's tragic when our responses or apex in this work is around the murder of George Floyd, or when there's an incident, there's a higher level of awareness. But what happens over time, it wanes. Right. And so the case I really believe is making the economic case. As I often say, it's not about taking from James to give to Jamal, but it's expanding the table and making sure that everybody has a seat and a chance to live out their own American dream and enjoy our country's economic prosperity.
You know, I would say that for the first time in corporate America, we are talking about race at work. I mean, before 2020, I don't think there were conversations about that, and I think we have stopped tiptoeing around some of these issues, and I'm excited for us to have the conversation because it's the opportunity to really look in the mirror and understand what needs to be done. Because I think we can't just be doing different things. We need to do things differently, and I do feel like we're in that moment to do so. And I also think it's okay not to be perfect. Like, we just need to continue to make progress.
Amen to that. Thank you both, Rick,
Thank
Quita,
you
for joining us. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.